Amen. Thank God that we are able to come into his house and dance around, turn around. You know, I saw Joed trying to turn around. I don't know how he was going to do it with on the drums. But we thank God that we are all worshiping one Father, a God who loves us all and requires from us all that he asks, he requires us to do. Some time ago, the Lord, around the end of the last year, the Lord directed my thoughts to the subject of holy living. And you may have noticed that I've been sharing on this particular theme for some time now. I have shared on the thought of the attitude for holy living. I have shared on the atmosphere for holy living. And today, as God would have me, I'm sharing on the activities of holy living. For our time together, I have chosen the passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and beginning to read at verse 17 through 26. Stand with me as we read it together. The following directives I have no praise for you, for your meetings do not do more harm than good. In the first place, I hear that when you come together as a church, there are divisions among you, and to some extent, I believe it. No doubt there have no difference to show which you have God's approval. No doubt, when you come together, it is not the Lord's Supper that you eat. For when you are eating, some of you go ahead with your own private suppers.
As a result,
one person remains hungry and others get drunk.
Don't you have homes
to eat
and drink?
Or do you despise the church of God by humiliating those who have nothing? What shall I say to you?
Shall I praise you?
Certainly not in this matter. For I received from the Lord what I also passed on to you.
The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread,
and
when he had given thanks, he broke it
and said,
"This is my body,
which is for you.
This do in remembrance
of me."
In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup,
saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes."
Amen. We pray your blessings upon this time together, O God. May your word come alive in our hearts. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. I've chosen the passage of Scripture today partially because it's the day we have chosen to celebrate the Lord's Supper. But more so, because in this passage, the Apostle Paul is giving the church at Corinth a lesson in how they ought to behave themselves. To my mind, it speaks not only to a time of coming together at communion, but what seems should be their adopted manner of living as professing Christians. The Lord's Supper, like baptism, is an outward and a visible sign of an inward and divine grace. This is passed on to us by the death of Jesus Christ on the cross. One person has said it is a good representation of the good news of Christ's death for our sins and should remind us of his glorious return. When we participate in the event, it should be seen as a source of strength to our faith through the fellowship of the saints and our communion with Christ. In our passage, beginning at verse 19, Paul makes reference to a situation that existed in the church at Corinth. You see, when it was time for the Lord's Supper, there was a fellowship meal. It was either before the Lord's Supper, which was in preparation for that event, or it followed the Lord's Supper. But at this time, the people would gather for this fellowship meal. And as Paul heard it, whether it was reported to him or he actually saw it, it seemed as though it had become a very unholy affair. In the sense that there were some who had a lot to eat, and there were others who went hungry. Paul condemned these actions, not so much because they were gathering, and not so much because they were a part of a fellowship, but he condemned what was going on within the fellowship. There was no love. There was no caring. If you came to the fellowship meal and you felt like eating all that there was, you did it. In other words, there were some who were feasting sumptuously, and there were those who were hungry. Those who had nothing to drink, and as the word says, there were those who were getting drunk. And Paul condemned this attitude. The activities of holy living does not include selfishness. It does not include greed. It includes caring and comforting. it includes respect and fellowship with one another. Let me begin by sharing this thought. The activities of holy living are conditioned by the remembrance of what Christ has done for us. Christ says in the book of Luke, chapter 21 and verse 19, and also in our passage today, 1 Corinthians 11 and verse 24, says, do this in reference to the Lord's Supper, do this in remembrance of me. Communion is a time when we come together as children of God, and our focus is on Christ. So that when we remember Christ in the Lord's Supper, we focus on what he has done for us. The early church would remember that Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper on the night of the Passover meal. The message for us in this thought is that just as the Passover celebrated the deliverance from slavery in Egypt, the Lord's Supper should be a celebration of our deliverance from sin by Christ's death on the cross. If we ever lose sight of this sacrifice of Christ, communion becomes just a pious habit. And it is no longer a celebration of Christ and will have no impact upon our everyday conduct. You see, some of us dress better than we dress for communion, than we dress for other times for Communion Sunday. I remember as a young boy growing up in the church, it was the day when the men turn up in their black suits and their white shirts and the black ties. And the ladies would be dressed in their all-white dresses. Where are the white dresses today? But the ladies would be dressed in their white dresses. Some of them long white dresses. And that was considered the dress for Communion Sunday. But if we lose sight, as I said before, of the sacrifice of Christ, that is all that it becomes. A pious habit, a Sunday when we dress up, when we look our best, but yet we lose the real meaning of the celebration. That is why some of us are able to leave the communion table and go right back into life as usual, doing the same time, the same things, the same way, and they have no impact on us. Verse 23 and verse 24 and 25 says, the teaching here is that we do not see these emblems as just wafers and grape juice, but we see them as representing the sacrifice that Christ made on our behalf. Paul was shocked by the behavior of these people, their selfishness, their gluttonous behavior, and their drunkenness. despised the church of God, and it shamed the poor. He says to them, don't you have houses that you can eat in? You see, it was such a disgraceful behavior that they were coming just to feast. Here is the thought. An intentional focus on the cross and the sacrifice of Christ should have an impact on our conduct in life. For as we focus on the sacrifice, it should direct the way that we conduct ourselves. One little chorus that used to sing says, when I think of the goodness of Jesus and what he has done for me, my weary soul cries out, hallelujah, praise the Lord for saving me. So when we come into communion service or the Lord's Supper, whatever you refer to it as, it must be a time where the focus is on the sacrifices that Christ made and continued to make. The activities of holy living are conditioned by our remembrance of what Christ did for us. His death must mean something to us. And if you have not reached a point where this is the case, maybe you shouldn't take communion. Here is my second point. The activities of holy living are confirmed in the relationship of what Christ is doing for us. It's a focus on what he did. It's a revelation of what he is doing. Romans chapter 6 and verse 4 says, reminds us, the children of God, that we are buried with Christ, so that we may live a new life. In verse 20 and 21 of our text, Paul condemns the type of behavior that was going on in the fellowship meal because it was not pleasing to God and was therefore not a revelation of Christ. The actions reflected selfishness, as I said, disrespect, a lack of care, and this does not lend itself, these behaviors does not lend themselves to activities of holy living. In Colossians chapter 3, in the first 3 verses, Paul reminds us that we have been raised with Christ, and we should set our minds on things above, for our lives are now hidden with Christ in God. And we slip down in that same chapter, the verses 5 to 8, the thought is here that the entire, as a matter of fact, the entire chapter talks about the pattern that is set. And down in verse 15, the highlight of these instructions, here it is recorded as Paul wrote, let the peace of God rule in your hearts. We have been called to peace. The Lord's Supper brings with it the idea of fellowship. A fellowship with your fellow men, your brothers and your sisters. This is the kind of union, the kind of communion that must exist at this time, where we have sweet, as the old folks used to say, we have sweet fellowship with one another, as if you didn't have sweet fellowship at no other day. But that was an expression. But it surely does and should reflect a fellowshipping of the saints, and as I mentioned earlier, we communion with God. Romans chapter 12, verse 18 challenges us that as much as is within our power, live peaceably with all men. If we reach a point where we follow this instruction, communion and fellowship will be real, because we would look beyond some of the things that we focus on, and we look at our brothers and sisters as human beings, as our brothers and as our sisters, and we are willing to commune with them. We willingly reach out, we willingly hug, we shake hands, we kiss, all because we are doing what God requires of us to do. And our coming together around the Lord's table is an expression of this. It is a picture of what Christ continues to do for us. He brings us into a family. We become united in this body, into the family of God. And as we live for God, and as we live for our fellow brothers and sisters, and as that fellowship is reflected from us, it is a beautiful picture of what Christ continues to do for us. And those on the outside looking in and seeing how we are behaving, and seeing how we are reflecting the goodness of God, and seeing how we are reflecting what Christ is doing with us, they too would be drawn to us and pointed to Christ. God, this is what God requires of us. Fellowship. Back in the early church, the people on the outside said, "Behold how they love each other." And there is nothing that will draw men and women to Christ like the expression of love among the children of God. Here is a final thought. The activities of holy living are contained with regard to the return, the second return of Christ. Here in the passage that we're looking at, 1 Corinthians 11, verse 26, Paul reveals another purpose for observing the Lord's Supper. He says it is a proclamation of Christ's death for our sins. But built into that proclamation is the promise that Christ will one day return. The Lord's Supper involves both a looking back to the cross and the examination of our present living, present relationship, and our looking forward to Christ's imminent return to earth. In verse 26, he says, whenever you do this, whenever you come to the Lord's table, you do show or proclaim the Lord's death. And the suggestion here is that we must so conduct ourselves as those who know what we must do to show forth or to validate the death and the return of our Lord Jesus Christ. He says, until he comes again. The meaning here is that this observance is to never cease being a part of the church's practice. Regardless of how long you may live, regardless of how long things may go on, the communion service, the Lord's Supper, must always be a part of the church's ritual until he comes again. Within this, there is a challenge. The challenge is that since it is the fact that one day Christ will return to judge his people, an understanding and an acceptance of that truth should reflect holy living. For he has said, be ye holy, for I am holy. You see, if we concern ourselves then with the fact that the holy God, whose holy Son sets forth holiness as the way of life, will return to receive a holy people, then that should have an impact on the way we conduct ourselves. Christ said, be ye holy, for I am holy. He said, I will return. And as we come into the Lord's Supper, as we come into communion service, this thought must occupy our minds. And if we can accept it, if we can understand it, that one day Christ is going to come to receive us, we would want to live as holy people. We observe the Lord's Supper. We come into communion with regards to the fact that one day he will return. Let me conclude with this. David Watson, in his book, I Believe in Evangelism, records a statement from one John Scott, who stated, and I quote, if the cross, Christ's death, is not central in our thinking, it is safe to say that our faith, whatever it be, is not Christian faith. Or our creed, whatever it be, is not the Apostles' Creed. In other words, if you are not living the life in Christ, it is not holy living. If you are not conducting yourself with a clear vision of what Christ requires, it is not holy living. The Lord's Supper reminds us to keep the cross of Jesus Christ central. He says, do this. And whenever you do it in remembrance of me. In other words, with a focus on Christ, his death his burial, his resurrection, his coming again. And if we can focus on these things, it will have an impact on the way we behave ourselves. So I challenge you to come. Come to communion as often as you can. Come with love for others. Come in remembrance of the Lord and examination of yourself. It gives us frequent reminder that we need to deal with ourselves and our sin as it relates to holy living before the Lord. That's why Paul says, let a man examine himself. Let the Holy Spirit examine us all, that as we come, our focus will be right. Our relationships will be right. And our living would be right. Pray with me. Father, thank you for the challenge of your word.